Today I'm speaking with Jay Bowles of the YouTube channel Plasma Channel. Jay makes incredible videos on high voltage physics, building fascinating devices that highlight the magic of plasma and explaining a range of electrical phenomena. Jay has a unique story and a true love of science and technology. He exhibits what it means to be passionately curious, and his perspective is exactly what's needed to push the boundaries of science. He's also simultaneously a wonderful science communicator and believes strongly in the creator space. It was an absolute pleasure speaking with him. And without further ado, please welcome Jay Bowles. Okay, so I am here with Jay from Plasma Channel. Thank you so much for joining today. I really appreciate taking the time.
Glad to be here.
Yeah. So, I like to begin with every guest, even though I will have given you a pre-recorded introduction. I think it's best to hear in your own words how you might introduce and explain yourself. So if you could begin there, that'd be great.
Absolutely. My name's Jay. I'm a full-time YouTuber, and I'm a content creator and a maker, and a little bit of a self-taught engineer as well. And so my passion lies in producing high-voltage devices and experimenting with insanely high voltages and kind of pushing the boundaries of physics and seeing what happens in that little sliver of physics we call high-voltage physics.
Mm-hmm. So I'll start with a pretty general question following up on that, which is, what is high-voltage physics, and what do you think makes it such an interesting area of science and research?
This is such a great question because I'm actually doing a lecture in LA. I leave tomorrow morning to do a lecture for a conference, and I have several slides dedicated to
what is it?
What is high voltage? And so high voltage is typically defined as, see now I'm doing my spiel for my slides, but it's true. It's typically defined as over 360 volts. And physics is, a field of study chiefly concerned with using over the top and overly complicated equations to describe how a ball goes downhill. You got high voltage is 360 volts, and physics is the study and the interactions of matter and how they work in the universe. So when you put them together, high voltage physics is just like how matter interacts at insanely high voltages, which it's not normal. It's not what you think. It's extremely exotic. It's phenomenal. And it's the closest thing to magic that you'll ever see. So high voltage physics is the physics of matter above 360 volts. And that's not even fully agreed upon. Some people say, like OSHA, OSHA, calls high voltage over 50 volts. So it's not fully agreed upon. Yeah. I call it 360.
So what exactly happens at 360 volts? What do you start to see changing at that point?
Awesome. Yeah, awesome question too. And so that's why I have the threshold of 360-ish. It's because that is the general voltage agreed upon by most experimenters, most engineers, most electrical engineers. That is the lowest voltage you can possibly have, where you have a gap between two wires, and without striking the wires together, you can get a continuous arc of electricity to jump the gap. And that gap is like a tenth of a millimeter, really tiny. But you drop the voltage lower than that, and you can't form a continuous arc in the air. So I define high voltage as the moment you can have a continuous arc of electricity ionizing the air between two little points of a wire.
And that, I'm sure, changes with distance, right? Is that sort of a standardized distance? Are you choosing that length for any particular reason?
You mean the length of the gap?
Yeah, because I imagine if you lengthen the gap, you're going to need more voltage to get...
Correct. Yes, correct. On the lower scale, high voltage is mildly predictable based on the distance of the gap and the distance, say, of a spark. If a spark is 1 centimeter long versus a 2 centimeter long spark, you can, at the lower voltages, determine based on gap size. Now, there's a bunch of variables that come into play. Back when, before they had multimeters and before they had transistorized electronics, how they would measure high voltage was actually two brass spheres, two standardized 1-inch brass spheres, and they're perfectly polished. And that was the standard of how the electrodes would look. And the standard that the American Society of Electrical Engineers uses is for every centimeter of gap that a spark jumps, it's 30 kilovolts. Mm-hmm. Only if you have these smooth spheres. If you have two sharp points, it changes everything, and the standard goes away. So the standard is using these spheres, and every centimeter is 30 kilovolts to jump an extra centimeter.
Yeah, it's fascinating how arbitrary some of these definitions and standards seem,
They absolutely change. It's crazy.
But I guess you need that arbitrary baseline. So I guess it makes sense.
You do, yeah. And
So
a lot of these baselines were back before we had a lot of modern tech. So those baselines we still kind of carry over today, but then it gets old.
yeah, the one that comes to mind in a different category is horsepower. You know, like if you really look at what is a horsepower, it's almost like, wait, really? Like that they didn't redefine that somehow at some point?
You know, yeah, and that's a really good point because with horsepower, that's something that's like I didn't really read into that until probably 6 to 9 months ago, where I was like,
same,
what's the
actually.
origin of horsepower? I think I saw some other YouTubers' video about it, and it's weird.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense and no sense at the same time is kind of how I walked away from it.
That's the best way to put it, yeah.
Yeah. So another sort of basic question, what is plasma? Why do you find plasma so interesting?
So plasma, in the textbook definition, plasma is the fourth state of matter. There's kind of 5 ordinary states. We're working on actually discovering a 6th. You have solid, liquid, gas. Then you superheat it, you get plasma. Plasma is the 4th state, and it's consisting of charged ions. It's basically a electrically charged gas. You go further, and I think it's called ECB. I forget the acronym for it. It's the 4th state of matter. Now, I love plasma because never in your life will you ever see what, say, a Tesla coil does, or with the exception of lightning, you'll never see a thing like lightning except lightning, right? The point I'm trying to make is it's so insanely beautiful and awe-inspiring, and it commands respect. It commands authority, and I love it. And a lot of why I like plasma is simply the aesthetics of it. It just mesmerizes me, and I've been staring at it for 20 years in my parents' garage, and then my first apartment, and my second apartment, and through multiple relationships, and through multiple cities and states I've lived. It's never changed. It's just the most beautiful thing to me. You never see these colors and these shapes and these plasma textures, so to speak. You don't see sparks in your daily life. It's just very special and beautiful to me.
Absolutely. But I'll give you an example of where it's not typical, so I wouldn't categorize it in daily life. And I wanted to bring this up separately, so this is actually quite convenient. Going through your catalog of videos in preparation for this, one of my favorite video of yours that relative to some of your more recent videos didn't get a fraction of the engagement it certainly deserved and I would have expected was the one about St. Elmo's fire. And I was watching it, and I frankly, I thought I sorted by popular. So I thought that was going to be one of your most popular videos. And I saw and went, this is amazing. And this is one closer to an example of something where, I mean, it's rare, but you might encounter it. There's at least a chance. So
it's a very valid point, and kind of inspiring me to reshoot that video now.
Well, let me ask you, just for anyone watching who may have not seen that video, if you mind giving a brief explanation of St. Elmo's fire. And I have a few follow-up questions to that.
Absolutely. And maybe I should have included St. Elmo's fire in my upcoming speech. That's a great one. So St. Elmo's fire is amazing. Right? I've never had the honor of seeing it myself. Most people, I'd argue the overwhelming majority of people, will never even hear about it or see it in their life. St. Elmo's fire was very common back in the era of having, I don't know the technical term, back when we were sailing ships across the sea, before when we needed really tall masts that stuck out of the ocean, 50 meters out of the ocean, something insanely high, 40 meters. Now, during a thunderstorm, you're on the ocean. The ocean is perfectly flat in theory-ish. You're a sharp mast of wood sticking out. There's electrically charged atmosphere. Your boat is on salt water, and your boat is going to be wet, so it's conductive. So you're just a sharp conductive point sticking out of the earth with a charged atmosphere. And St. Elmo's fire is this amazing purple fuzz. It's a purple flame that bursts out of the top of the mast. And sometimes there's a couple videos online of people holding their fingers up, and their fingers will just bust into a purple flame. And it doesn't hurt them. It smells very strongly like ozone. It tends to not damage the ship. But old sailors, they had their saint, Saint Elmo. Saint Elmo was their patron saint to protect them while they're out at sea. And this was a sign they interpreted from Saint Elmo that the storm was passing. my memory serves me right, the storm was passing, and so the top of the mast, it's this big, like 2-foot tall purple flame, and that is now I'm rambling. That is a high voltage discharge. Perfect. Yeah, it's a high voltage discharge because that sharp point is the only point around for a strong electric field to form, and then the air ionizes, and then there's an exchange of charges between the atmosphere and the Earth, and it all takes place on the only sharp point on the ocean, right, the mast of the ship, and so it glows purple. I would love to see it. I will probably never get the chance.
You have to get your pilot's license, I suppose.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, and that's right. Say almost fired. Also. It's got a different name, but a very related phenomenon that happens on the windshields of airplanes when they fly through charged atmosphere. You'll have big static discharges just busting across the windshield. That is a more possible thing to see.
Yeah, sure. Is that a problem for ships today? I mean, obviously they're designed quite differently, but there's a lot of the aspects of the design that I could imagine might make it more likely or more problematic, perhaps.
It's a great question. In my research for that video,
Your focus was planes, so.
Yeah. Well, I never really ran across. Oh, were you referring to the St. Elmo's fire on the airplanes the whole time?
On the airplanes.
Give me, all right, 20 seconds. I'm going to go back to the airplanes, right?
Yeah, all good.
So I mentioned when airplanes fly through a storm, even 5 kilometers out from a thunderstorm, relatively far away-ish, 5-10 kilometers, you'll still have charged atmosphere. Now, as your airplane rams through the air, you have a lot of friction with the air. That builds up a natural charge anyways. But now you're ramming through charged atmosphere. So the people inside the plane are fine. The equipment inside the plane is fine. 99.9% of the time, nothing happens. But what is cool is if you make friends with pilots, pilots will take their phones out and record while they're flying. And you have the most beautiful 6, 8, 10-foot fractal discharges that just bust across the windshield every other second. And that's just the discharges on the outside of the metal plane trying to find a place to escape to. Mm-hmm. Now to go back to it being bad for ships and airplanes, if it happens on a ship, like the traditional St. Elmo's fire on ships, not bad. I haven't read any particular cases where modern ships are affected. It can strongly affect radio communications. And if your radio antenna is not built appropriately, it can also damage your radio a little bit. Mm-hmm. And as for airplanes, same thing. They will mention that during these flashes on the windshield, a lot of times the radio will have a lot of static, but very rarely did I hear about any true damage happening. It can flake away some of the paint on the front of the airplane, but it's quite minor.
I see. Yeah, and one follow-up to that, this is basically a question asking you to speculate, but, think of all of the famous missing airliners. The Malaysian Airlines flight is one of the most notables and so on, and a lot of the times they're in regions where you might expect more electric charge, more charged gases in the air. Yeah. Do you think there's any likelihood, because you said 99.9, and yes, most of the time it's disrupting radio signals, but do you consider that within the realm of possibility to be a contributing factor for some of these missing flights?
I hadn't thought of it, but
I doubt it, frankly, but I wanted to see if you thought perhaps if there's an engineering issue in some capacity with the plane, it might be enough to...
I'm inclined to say anything's possible, but when it comes to probable, I would say no, only that was a relatively modern plane that was being flown, and even though you get these flashes across the windshield of an airplane when you're driving through a charged atmosphere, the planes have these amazing, what are they called? We'll call them wicks. They have wicks on the tips of their wings that bleed off charge to make it so that those discharges up front on the windshield aren't too powerful, don't damage too much. So this is all actually taken into account in the modern design of the plane. However,
you can imagine that being damaged and that maybe having a totally different effect than we understand in those circumstances.
It's possible. It's certainly possible. I have no expertise in that field, but
sure. Just wanted to throw that out
and say it's possible. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. Yeah, I just thought it was a bit of a fun question. Similarly, I know for that video, I think one of the pilots you interviewed was a pilot for Iceland Air.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, so he must have some experience flying during the auroras. And I thought if there's anything you asked him or found out otherwise about does that intensify the effect? You might imagine that it does, at least strong auroras.
You would imagine that a strong aurora would intensify the electrification of the atmosphere. I believe I asked him if he had seen the auroras, but I don't recall. I don't remember him indicating that there was a correlation in his experience.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah.
But strong auroras fundamentally charge up the upper atmosphere. And there is a trickle effect where some of that charge will go down to the middle and lower atmosphere as well. So,
red, green, blue, as I learned from your videos.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So another thing I wanted to bring up kind of vaguely in the same vein, and I actually just saw this because I was doing a little bit of research about high voltage physics and plasma in terms of recent discoveries, just to see what interesting topics might be out there. And something that struck me very suitable for you, maybe not suitable for a video, but at least perhaps interesting, is I saw that there was, I think only a matter of days ago, there was some interesting research about bees and their charge, because they discovered that a swarm of bees has a comparable charge to that of a thunderstorm. And it's the same principle. Their wings are they slam into the air at slower speed. I mean, obviously all the parameters are drastically different, but they did for the first time measure charge on the wings of these bees and determine that in a swarm, it's about comparable to that of a thunderstorm. Now I forgot the number. It was millions, if not billions, of bees to power an LED. So it's quite trivial. But just the fact that they do has opened the door to all sorts of potential new research, some communication, and then they were also discussing the case of much larger locust swarms and saying, well, how big could biological charge get in that environment?
Ooh. Yes, a large locust swarm, and couple that with the fact that locusts, I think, are usually in drier areas.
Mm-hmm. I think
so.
Well,
you're going to have a lot of dust in the air, all those beating wings, you're going to have additional charge separation. That's crazy. I'd never heard about that with the bees. Yeah, and the thing to keep in mind too is, let's say it only powers the equivalent of an LED or something like that. Well, if that's the power we're talking about, that's all a theoretical calculation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what's phenomenal about electrostatics, which is what they would be measuring, is electrostatic charge. You could have tens of thousands of volts built up, but it's at a microamp. So then you say, oh, it's only a watt or two. It's only enough for an LED. So when you actually break it down, I'd be really curious to see, are those bees actually producing many tens of thousands of volts, but it's just at a low power level? That'd be curious to see.
Yeah, definitely. And again, I think this was literally only a matter of a few days ago, so hopefully a lot more comes out. Yeah, I thought that might be interesting for you.
No, I hadn't seen that. I've been bunkering down, preparing for that the speech coming up, and haven't read the news much lately.
Yeah, sure. So is that just for a conference? What exactly is that for?
So it's called SuperCon. Are you familiar with the website Hackaday?
No, actually.
They're a cool website, kind of for makers and builders all across the world. It's kind of like a one-stop shop. Mm-hmm. I can never say that term.
They all work.
For everybody to come together, and you surf the internet. You surf this website for everybody's crazy creations across the world. Somebody made a flamethrower. Somebody made a robot dog that, I don't know, does calculus. It's a place where makers come together and you show off what you built. I've worked with them for a long time. I've shared them with my videos, and it helps my channel out a little bit with views. It helps them out because they have content. And so they're throwing SuperCon for, I think, third or fourth year in a row. And that's in LA, and it is there 8 speakers or 16 speakers over the weekend? And it's people from all around the world that have come to present something that they do or something they're excited about. And so they invited me to come talk about.
Nice. Will that be published anywhere at any point, or is it?
It will actually. It'll be, I believe, for free on Hackaday's YouTube page. I want to say a few days after the event. They're going to record and post it after the fact.
Nice. Well, for anyone listening, definitely check that out. Of course, you're an extension of our conversation here. So I want to talk a little bit about you as well, because one reason I thought that the bee question was particularly interesting for you is, reviewing your Q&A, for example, your degrees. I mean, you have multiple from my understanding, but you studied biology. Yeah. Correct?
Yeah.
And I don't want to be too repetitive with the Q&A, but do you mind kind of explaining your trajectory?
Yeah.
How you got from there to here?
Oh, man. My trajectory is so non-traditional.
That's the best.
You're going to laugh. Anybody who watches this is just going to be like, okay, so I've always been passionate about science my entire life, primarily physics, ever since my high school physics teacher, Miss Donaldson. I hope she's watching. She's awesome.
Shout out Miss Donaldson.
Miss Donaldson, Kentwood High School, the best. So she inspired love of physics for me. And then I went to college. I went to college for an original degree of physics, and I switched it. About halfway through, I turned it into a minor of physics. And long story short, I ended up pursuing a degree in marine biology with a minor in physics, a minor in astronomy, and a minor in human physiology. I'm overall very passionate about the sciences, but I chose biology purely. I don't know if this is good or bad advice for anybody watching, but I chose biology out of an employment desire. And I figured I was kind of afraid that turning physics into a job would kill my passion of physics. So I put it on the side as a minor and continued doing physics on the side in my garage, in my living room, almost on a daily basis, kind of doing my own experiments and my own learning. Now the pathway, it's very convoluted. Let me summarize this. Graduated with a degree in marine biology from the University of Oregon. I moved to Austin, Texas, and pursued. I was a television actor in film and television for about 4 or 5 years.
I have questions about that later as well.
And but throughout all of that, I was kind of growing this desire to want to present. I'm in front of camera, in front of people, and I was always shy. But then that changed me to be more like, oh wow, through a lens, through a camera, you can reach more people. And even though my degree was marine biology, that was more just kind of, as much as I enjoyed it was more of like a job thing to pay the bills. My passion is always physics. And so then after a few years of TV, I was like, I want more control over the content I'm involved in. I want to tell the world what I find fascinating. And the best way to do that is YouTube, in my opinion. And so, or one of the best ways. And so then I hopped on over to YouTube, and that's the really summarized story, as long as it was. That sucker was really summarized.
So we'll break that down a little bit. So You're saying you chose marine biology for predominantly employment purposes. It's still in the realm of science, so that still fits. But then the first thing you did following graduation was acting. So was this all part of the plan from the beginning, or was that just an attempt to go a different direction and it ended up being beneficial for what you do now?
So good thing to ask. So some of the things I left out is after graduation, I immediately started working at an aquarium in Portland.
Okay.
And then I worked my way up enough to then actually request to the owners and say, hey, I like Texas. I heard you guys are opening up a branch in Austin. Ship me down there. Pay for my moving and ship me down there, and I'll help open up the new branch. Well, that went south really fast. I moved down there, and within like a month and a half, 2 months, I had to quit because it was a disaster. And but in the meantime, I did some soul searching, and I'd met just a couple of actors in the Austin area, and it kind of hit me. That's when it hit me of like, oh wow, like you can reach more people through a lens, through a camera. And then I hopped into the film. A lot of bouncing around and trial and error to get into the film industry, that's for sure.
And another quick question before moving forward from there. I find it, because I feel like marine biology is sort of closer to the art history of science in the sense that I don't think people identify that as much as if you're going to look for something employable, people do chemistry, mechanical engineering, so on. Yeah. But you chose marine biology as the source for the employable degree. Did you have something in mind? Or, you're clearly correct, so.
I had a few things in mind, and the desire to do marine biology wasn't purely employment based. I also am very passionate about space and the stars, and the depths of the oceans essentially kind of represented a closer, more tangible exploration of space. We have so much to discover in the ocean. Combined with, I did some research when I was starting college, and some of the most highly paid biology degrees on the West Coast were actually marine biology, a bachelor straight out of college, and that was, it was like over 10 years ago, so it's probably changed now. I digress. Shoot, what was your question?
No, so that essentially answers that question.
Oh, okay.
But I'll throw you another one as well. So you began acting in Austin, and from that point, how long until you started doing that, sort of from the perspective of, oh, this is a useful skill set, I can reach people? And you've alluded in that Q&A, and I think a few other places too, the potential of having your own television series, for example. So was it YouTube? Was it that? Was it both? I'm just curious how it all sort of manifested.
I So when I moved to Austin and I was working in one of the aquariums there were good times, there were bad times, like any job. Kind of a frustration grew in me that there are certain elements of scientific education that I thought were overlooked, and certain things weren't emphasized enough. And then the film and television being in it made me realize, well, as a beginning actor, you have no power. You just be grateful to get whatever you can book, even if it's the worst role in the world. You be grateful you booked that, and that frustrated me a little bit further. I loved it, and it taught me the value, in my opinion, the value of being in front of people. And right, so that grew in me the desire to then go ahead and reignitiate like my love and my passion for the sciences, and then hop on over to YouTube. So YouTube was actually, it was accidental, but kind of waiting to happen. I had a buddy I was working in a medical laboratory in Austin, and this buddy said he was going to start a Let's Play channel. And the dude had never been in front of TV. He was a cool guy, but at the time when I met him, he wasn't the most confident guy. And I thought, like, wait a second, like, if he can be in front of like a camera at his house and do a YouTube video, like I just stopped doing acting, but like I've been acting for 4 years at this point. I should be able to do that. So that made me be like, okay, I'm frustrated about how certain scientific concepts are not presented the way I want them to be, in aquariums and in society. And then also I was frustrated by how I had no power as a beginning actor, at least. And I was like, well, this is the chance to go ahead and educate the world the way I see fit, my style, my rules. And so I was like, oh, YouTube is the door for that. And so it's actually kind of a combination of things that came together to make me be on this path right now.
I see. And now you're officially full-time. Because again, I know about a year ago you were still at least transitioning to that. But you said at the beginning you are now full-time YouTuber.
Yep. As of beginning of August. Yeah. So
Oh, wow.
August, September, October. Yeah. So 3 full months now I've been full-time. Yeah.
Nice. And I noticed, I mean, it seems to also be paying off to be doing that. I think your most recent, I know at least your second to most recent video, I think is your most viewed at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm really grateful for that. That I put a lot of heart into that video. I think it is paying off, the full time. And I've had a lot of friends, obviously people close to me have asked me, is that scary going full time YouTube? And I say, well, think of it this way. I honestly don't have a life anymore, but I also don't have a job. It's more like a lob or a jife. They're kind of like blended together. But I really like that because now, I'm very, very passionate about the YouTube video production. I'm very passionate about the creator ecosystem. I'm very passionate about the whole product of YouTube. And to me, I've gone from having a life and a job that the job I left here in the Seattle area, it was a great company. Nothing wrong with them. It just wasn't a good fit for me. And I went from life and job to I don't really have either of them, but my sole purpose now is present the next best idea, present my passion better. And so I wake up every morning. I work 7 days a week. Sometimes I'll work 10 hours in a day. Sometimes I'll work 2 hours in a day. But I'm pretty much every single day of the week, every single day of the month, doing something YouTube related for either the next video or answering questions and comments on past videos. It's always something related because now I'm full-time YouTube. And I thought it would be like a 9 to 5 thing. Like, oh yeah, I'm going to do 9 to 5. I actually told my friends, I'm going to make sure I take Saturday and Sunday off.
Didn't happen, right?
That happened the first weekend.
Yeah. I think it's just about, because I feel like when you know that you can do as you please, there's no longer that desire to stop.
Yeah, and it's something that this absolutely has its stresses, but it's something that I chose, I worked towards, and I'm just honored and excited and happy to have the opportunity. And so I don't feel this desire to be like, man, I need a week off, right? A lot of creators get to that point. I haven't gotten there yet, thankfully.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So what's the future of the channel hold? I mean, I'm sure you have a list of ideas that are more DIY projects, but are you planning to stick within the realm of maker projects just to the fullest extent that you can reach, or do you have sort of a pivot that we might expect in the future?
So I've put some consideration into that in recent months, and I've actually kind of deviated a little bit away from the core beginning of the channel. And the core beginning of the channel was kind of like a half and half of experiments and builds and a little bit of like did you knows type of videos. And I've kind of gone over to more like 3/4 of the time it's just like builds, which I love building stuff. I inherited my grandfather's and my dad's kind of tinkering gene, so to speak. And so I love being physical and building things. But for the future, I kind of want to go with almost like a half and half approach. So I'm going to continue doing builds and continue, I have a laser cutter coming, a 3D printer. I'm going to start doing some 3D printing. I have a lot of cool things coming up, but I also want to make sure that I keep incorporating what I was passionate about in the first place, which is just like these crazy experiments. Mm-hmm. And then I do have some big collaborations coming up. I'm speaking with a few YouTubers across the seas. And then I do this place I'm currently in right now becomes solely mine here in about 5 or 6 days. So I want to turn it into just a really big filming studio with a lot of production capabilities.
I see. So do you have have you been working in a workshop at this point, or has most of this been done in your apartment?
In my apartment.
In the acrylic store?
Yeah, and the acrylic store.
Yeah.
The past 3 years, which has been the most growth for the channel, has all been in a studio apartment in Redmond, Washington.
Nice.
It was a great studio, lots of light. It was I actually moved in because I walked into the studio and I just said, like, yes, perfect. There's a big giant wall, an unadulterated giant wall. I was like, oh, filming background, perfect. And then right over here was just nothing but floor to ceiling windows. And I was like, oh my God, so much light. Yes. And so I chose that spot, and I was not the best host for house parties because people would come over and I had a couch, a 2-person couch, a TV, and my dining room table had drill marks, circular saw marks, epoxy, and burns all over it because I'd also use my dining room table as a building
soldering
space.
Soldering
station.
Yeah.
You've actually probably seen it in a lot of my videos, the dark wood table. Yes,
mm-hmm.
Now, though, now I'm fortunate to have just moved into, let me take this off, a space that's a little bit similar. So like lots of light.
Nice.
And then there is my little filming corner right there.
Nice.
It's still a 1-bedroom apartment, but it's a big, big step up from the studio days.
Sure. It's funny as a YouTuber, when you're selecting the apartment, you probably walk in and go, well, how does this work as a creative space more than a living space?
100%. I don't know how it is for other YouTubers, but 100% that is how it is for me. When I move now, I need a lot of variables. I need to feel like a good zen feeling, a good nice and happy, good area, whatever. But the top thing is always like number one. Is this good for filming? No. Okay, not interested.
Mm-hmm. That's it's super funny. I mean, it makes sense, of course, but it's super funny. Okay, We'll shift back a little bit to some of the physics concepts, because I realized there was a few other topics that I wanted to get to. The first of which, again, is also one of your more recent videos, and that's with respect to aviation. So what is your thoughts, I'll call it high voltage physics, let's say, as a practical means of thrust for airplanes and vehicles?
Oh, ionic thrust? Or just high voltage use
ionic
in general?
Thrust, specifically ionic thrust, sorry.
So I think at this exact moment, it's in its infancy. Mm-hmm. I do see the feasibility, and I love what MIT did in 2018. As I'm sure you're familiar.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a big advocate of we can always improve. And if we had this barely flying airplane that MIT made with a bunch of bright people, much smarter than me, if they made it, well, that tells me it can be made even better. I'm a firm believer that everything can always be better. It just takes enough minds, enough time, and enough resources, and enough, strong cups of coffee to come up with a better idea. So I do see ionic thrust as a feasible means for low-speed flight. I see it as completely changing the game when it comes to low-speed flight, only low-speed flight, because then you have an aircraft that has very, very few moving parts. Maintenance is now virtually zero. You will have a lot of other challenges associated with it, but I'm going to focus on the positives.
Sure. Yeah.
And as for cars, I don't see it being anything feasible at all for ground-based transportation. For ships, I see it being feasible, but it would not be a fast ship.
Yeah. So what are you defining as low speed? If you could provide a bit of a range for that in the case of airplanes.
Yes, I don't actually have a numerical base, but what I've had in mind was low speed, such as like biplane or slower, like glider or slower. So to where the purpose of the airplane is simply to get from point A to point B, not to get there fast, not to be fast and dangerous, not to be agile, but simply just to move. So we're talking like ultralights, ultralights that people can build in their garages, or a little bit bigger than that. So small, slow-moving aircraft. And there actually are, in the past, I'd say past 3 to 6 months, companies have popped up in, I think, LA and Colorado, where they have these full-blown commercialized Ionic drones now. Have you seen those?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, they just commercialized them, just came out with them, I swear, like 2 weeks ago. And they are Ionic Thrust delivery drones.
Interesting.
And I've seen videos like years ago, people attempting it, and the drones just kind of, it's not an Ionic lifter. Like somebody made an actual kind of Ionic drone that's remote control. And they were all like wobbly and terrible in the past, but somebody just came out with one that is like commercialized. It looks strong and steady. So that tells me, there's an example, like we can always improve. And I see the feasibility of Ionic Thrust for low speed flight as a game changer. I do see it as plausible.
Yeah, that's fascinating in the case of drones. Could it also be a sort of a secondary safety system for other airplanes? Because it seems like if the function is just to keep the thing in the air and flying at sort of minimal capacity, it seems like that might be an interesting direction just as a backup.
It would be a good thing to consider. The one flaw of, depends how you look at it. The vision I had in my head, and the MIT kind of did themselves, was weight is the issue. Drag is the issue. Thrust is also the issue. The best way to get something flying with ionic thrust is to really incorporate the elements of the ionic thrust into the structure of the plane itself, so that you don't have a plane and a thruster. You have a thrane or a cluster. Right? It's just like the same. It's like blended together, and that way you reduce on parts, reduce on weight, and increase efficiency. So, but if we come from the perspective of, we're not talking about an ionic thrust airplane. We're talking about a normal airplane with ionic thrusters as a secondary. I would actually argue it might be best just to have like backup propellers,
I see.
That structure of that plane is already going to be heavy and designed for, engine flight.
At that point, the benefits aren't relevant, I guess. Yeah,
I believe so. Yeah. Cause you're going to need like an ultralight plane versus,
I see.
A gas powered plane can be much heavier.
I see. So yeah. Okay. Then the application in drones is quite clear then. I see.
Yeah.
So then beyond transportation, what do you see as a few of the other most exciting applications for a lot of this type of work?
Of high voltage in general, or the ionic thrust?
Very broadly, high voltage, anything, or fundamentally plasma. I'll give you one example that I wanted to bring up again as well, which is the cold plasma for disinfecting wounds.
I was hoping you'd ask me about that.
Oh, it's a matter of time. It's just a matter of time.
Excellent. I feel like I'm going through my slides for the speech here. I
hope that's a good thing, by the way.
It is, and hopefully it's not a bad thing for you. None of this is pre-planned. It's just like
certainly
perfect.
Not. Yeah, perfect. I'm very happy to hear that.
Yeah. So cold plasma, super cool thing. So it sounds like you're familiar with it. Anybody who's watching that isn't, plasma is almost always hot. Most plasma you know about. Whether you light a match and put it in the microwave, which that's a thing you can do. It makes a big plasma thing. Don't do it. I don't recommend that. Hot plasma is considered thermal plasma. Cold plasma, as the name suggests, it's considered non-thermal plasma. So Coolest thing ever. Plasma that you can touch, see, it is virtually silent, and it sterilizes anything it touches. And that goes for bacteria, viruses, prions, bacterial spores, fungi. It kills all of them, and it does it within seconds. So when it comes to the feasibility of using cold plasma or cold plasma wands, I think emerging medical markets is a really great place to start. Some hospitals have started including kind of tests of cold plasma wands when it comes to wound healing. And like you can ask the overwhelming majority of doctors. I actually had some doctors in my family. I kind of ran this idea by them, and they all agreed. They're like, "Oh yeah, no, like a clean wound is always going to heal faster. A clean wound is going to heal faster." And what a cold plasma, we'll call it a flame, like a cold plasma flame, because it looks like a torch. A little cold plasma flame, when it touches an open wound, it's going to kill everything on the surface, including, honestly, like your first layer of skin cells. But here's the trick. It's a wound. You've already obliterated that layer of skin cells or muscle cells, whatever it is. So it's not going to cause any further damage, but it will eradicate life on the surface. Now, that sounds bad until you take into account that your natural bacteria that your tissues are going to have, it'll take back over within a day. So you're wiping everything out, doing a fresh start, and it's going to take back over as long as you have sanitary situations. And so when it comes to cold plasma, it has some implications for like speeding up healing in cases of open wounds. And there's actually several studies that I talk about in the lecture.
And the way it works, it's an oxidative thing, right? Because again, it's cold, so
correct,
that's actually the way it's doing all of the disinfecting.
Correct. Yeah, it produces ozone and it produces nitrogen oxides. Wait, yeah, NO2. And then also you have electrical current present in that little flame that comes out. So those three things combined, electrical current,
that's all oxide. The three.
Oh yeah, life hates that. That's like a life killer. But luckily it also kills small parasites too. It's amazing.
Oh,
kills everything.
That is amazing. But so why, for example, might you choose to use cold plasma over more traditional disinfectants, for example?
Absolutely. So a couple of reasons for that. Alcohols can burn and irritate the open wound. Hydrogen peroxides generally don't do anything negative, but that bubbling action can cause some pain and cause some discomfort as well. We've all put hydrogen peroxide on our skin, and it's supposed to not hurt. It always hurts me. And then also iodine is another sterilizing agent. Iodine, there's, to my knowledge, not really any drawbacks to iodine. The cold plasma is a different approach, so to speak. And I guess it's fast, it's efficient, and it doesn't leave any markings you have to wipe off. No irritation whatsoever. It's a quick application of just a couple seconds, and you have a sterile surface without even touching it.
And the fuel source, so to speak, if I remember correctly, is, I guess, helium? Is that what you were using, for example?
Correct. You can use helium or you can use argon, and a lot of people will get really upset about the use of helium, but it's going.
I was just going to say.
It's going towards a humanitarian purpose, and we can produce helium artificially. We do it all the time in attempts for fusion.
So,
yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
And so, oh my gosh, I digress. What was the last thing you?
Well, we were talking about the scarcity of helium and people having an issue with cold plasma because.
That's right. Yeah, you can feed it. Okay, so back to your main point. Yeah, you can feed it helium or argon. Now, helium works the best. Because helium has really, really high electrical conductivity and super high thermal conductivity. So it ionizes really easily, but then also any heat from the ionization dissipates away super fast. So that flame that comes out at the end of, say, a cold plasma wand, that little purple plasma flame that we're talking about, it carries virtually no heat with it. Kind of because of the properties of helium, and the helium's flowing past the electrode really fast. It doesn't have time to heat up. So that gives you the cold plasma effect, something you can touch that's room temperature or even colder sometimes. But it sterilizes, it cleans, and it looks really cool.
Yeah, definitely. So in regards to the helium shortage, I mean, obviously in the case of fusion, we're trying to get more energy out than we put in, and that really is the challenge. It's not achieving fusion itself. But even if we were to accept some degree of energy loss, is using high voltage physics in a similar sort of manner a viable way of manufacturing helium? Or will, if we're not being particularly efficient, it will always just be a huge drain of energy?
So there's something to be said about no matter what process we do, it'll always be a huge drain of energy, right? And energy always flows downhill in terms of processes. So I would say I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, so I can't speak to it with definitive answers. But if we could produce helium in a way that is not outrageously inefficient, I would be a proponent of production in that method. Now, if we're talking, if we were talking, it takes hundreds and hundreds of kilowatts of power to get, half a liter of helium. Okay, no.
Yeah.
I pulled those numbers out of thin air, obviously.
Yeah,
but that's an
I
example
take
of
your
where
point,
I go,
though,
morally, I go, that's messed up.
We don't need helium that badly.
Yeah.
We'll figure out
we don't need to be using it that badly, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I find it, I find it such an interesting topic because every time I go to like a party store or see something like that and I'm watching them just blow through the helium, I mean, I'm not one of those people who's going to walk in and make a stink about it, but it does seem like it's something where it's like, maybe this is the point where at least for something as frivolous as that, we stop using it.
Something as frivolous, yeah, as party balloons. Yeah, and that's my party tank that I just, actually it's right over there still. I still got some. Yes. Yeah, that was just at a party store too, right?
Yeah.
And I always wondered, oh boy, it must be hard to procure helium. Because with my science background and science degree, I just had this assumption that like any gas besides air must be like licensed. You must have to get a license to No, you just go to a party store. You get a tank of helium. And you can get some like medical grade tanks without a license too. It's interesting.
I don't know how to feel about that. I guess happy and concerned.
Exactly. I'm the same way. There's something to be said about the supplies of helium and about our attempts to try and produce some of it without it being a huge sink of energy that is wasteful, of which I don't know those numbers.
Sure.
So I can't argue.
I guess we're just not close enough to running out where we're really going to put in the time and energy as a society to address it, but it will come.
It's true.
So
but you can also produce helium, if I remember correctly, from radioactive decay as well.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure that there's a number of ways. It's just which one is the optimal in terms of cost efficacy, I suppose. So we just touched on this very briefly, but of course, I believe you knew this was coming. Fusion. What is your take? I mean, I have seen in the last month, 2 months, as you pointed out in your recent video, there is so much hype, there is so much backlash. Where do you stand on your optimism or pessimism in terms of realizing it?
It is so interesting too that, I made this actually my last video was on an attempt at like a very, very basic fusion device. It's so interesting that while I was producing that video, by random chance, I was seeing the news pop up left and right as well. Like fusion here, fusion there, oh, in the UK, oh, in Japan, oh, in Korea, fusion this, oh, a new breakthrough over here. It definitely, I think we can all say from experience. I'm sorry, can you still hear me? My heater is very loud.
Yeah, I actually don't hear it whatsoever.
Perfect. It's like a train wreck coming out of the
My dog's been going crazy, and I hope you haven't heard it either.
No, I haven't heard it either.
Page. Perfect.
It definitely is cyclical in society with like, fusion is our answer. We're 5 years away. We're never 5 years away. We're never 10 years away. But I am a big proponent of, again, everything can always be improved. And if we don't strive towards something, we're never going to achieve it. Here's the beautiful thing of science. Beautiful thing of science. Okay. If you have a goal, and the goal is mathematically possible, but just like improbable or societally impossible, if it's mathematically possible, then in my mind, it is possible. And you just need the resources, the time, the innovation, and maybe a lot of time, maybe hundreds and hundreds of years, who knows? But I firmly believe the answer is yes, it'll happen. Will it happen in 5 years? No. But some of the breakthroughs that I've seen pop up in the news in the past 3-4 months give me a lot of hope that, maybe we'll have something in like 10, 15 years. The UK just unveiled their first industrial scale power plant that they're attempting to get net power out of with fusion, and it was publicly funded.
It's
And
amazing.
I know we've got ITER, we got all these other things, but those were more research. This was, I believe
Let's
it's
get
UK.
energy. Yeah.
Yeah, theirs is like,
I think so.
Yeah, it's just phenomenal. I think that the future of fusion looks good. Some people might not agree with me, but I firmly believe we need to keep up the public interest, and that I'm not a proponent of getting rid of fossil fuels. I'm just a proponent of, through science, everything is possible. We need the time, the resources, and the brains to come together, and then we can have our star in a jar. We can have something similar to that.
That really what it is, isn't it? Star in a jar. Star in a very big jar, but star in a jar.
It's such a catchy term, but no, I had to use it.
It just works. Sometimes those kind of cliches they're cliches for a reason.
But so. I honestly can't stress it enough. Like, it's fundamental to my being of who I am, beyond YouTube and beyond everything. It's why I've loved science since I was like 10 or 9 or whatever. I firmly believe that through science, all things are possible. You just need the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think I think people pick up on that, and I can speak for myself, and I think that's a big part of why people enjoy your content so much. Because no matter how good the outcome, people aren't interested in somebody droning through a project that's clearly frustrating and motivated by whatever. It's fun and exciting to watch somebody who step by step is feeling the same thrill that you are watching the video.
Yeah, I guess that's a good point. That's and I've learned that through the comments over the years that people really enjoy the being brought along for the journey aspect of video, and it does make it more fun to kind of be like, well, that didn't work out. I guess I'll have to order parts from Amazon and wait 4 more days and then try this again. And then you keep shooting the video. And I'm really glad you enjoy that. And I'm honored that people enjoy that too, because I've really enjoyed the bring you along type of concept of videos too.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, the full transition to full time, this is just the start, I suppose. You're in the stride to 1 million very quickly.
Yeah, man. And videos coming up. I got the Ionic Thruster version 2. I'm going to make a better fuser. I'm looking at the local regulations first, but then I'm going to build a better fuser and actually feed it deuterium. I also have, I need to build a new, I want to build a table. I'm going to build a plasma table, a dining room table.
Ooh.
And I don't know how to do on the channel, but I'll make a video about it because I need a new table and I want to make one full of like, I don't know, it's going to be cool. It's going to be a fractal table with epoxy, LEDs put into it, dead transistors I've killed over the years. I have a pile. I've never thrown away a single semiconductor that I've broken. I have this freaking pile of dead transistors.
Yeah, you got to do something with that. You have to. No,
so I got some cool videos coming up I'm really excited about.
That's excellent. So we have, my dog's going crazy again, so let me know if you can hear it. Perfect. I try to keep these around an hour, so I'll just ask you one final question before we wrap up. And that's that you had one piece of advice for somebody who has a niche interest or niche scientific interest, and they want to pursue it, whether traditionally professionally, or more along the lines of what you've found success with, what would you advise them?
Especially if it's a niche. I don't know how to say that. Niche.
Tomato, I think.
Yeah. If it's a niche topic, I would say find your why. And also always keep in mind, why not me? Why not me? And let that burn through your soul, through your veins, through your body. Why not me? Why do I love this? Why am I passionate about this? Why is this niche thing so interesting to me? And then find a way to monetize that. Find a way to spread that and share that with the world. And monetize doesn't mean you want to be rich and greedy and all that stuff. No, it just means find a way to make a living and be happy. But at all times, be emboldened by the question of why. Find your why of why it's passionate to you, and then try to help people see that passion.
Yeah, definitely a really great piece of advice, including from my own perspective.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for having this conversation with me. It's been lovely, truly.
Thanks for having me on. This was actually a really great experience, and